Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. That was my garden on April Fool's Day last year. If you look very closely, you'll be able to see there was a sprinkling of snow. Can we expect a repeat performance of this year as we head into April and towards the Easter period? As usual, I'm going to start by taking a look at the view across Europe and the North Atlantic. The animation runs from 18 GMT, Tuesday the 28th of March. At the outset, a southwesterly flow is pushing up across the UK. It's bringing milder air. It's also unsettled. In the short term, outbreaks of rain push across all areas, but then through Thursday and Friday, it's this nasty area of low pressure which needs watching very closely. It brings the potential for heavy rain and strong winds to southern parts of the UK. But the devil is in the details, because the exact track which it takes will determine just how things play out. If it goes a little bit further south, the strongest winds end up in northern France. A little bit further north, and then they track across southern Britain, because the strongest winds are on the southern flank of the low pressure. That's shown by the very tightly packed isobars. The details are uncertain at this stage, but I will come back to this a little bit later on. For now, though, I'll just continue the sequence, because one way or another, that low pressure moves away. And then on this model run, somewhat colder air moves in behind it, but high pressure starts to have more influence. And increasingly, wet conditions become confined to the north and the west. The air temperatures associated with that sequence: here's the UK under green shading to start off with, so quite mild aloft. The blues and purples indicate the cold air. As I run this, the UK stays under the milder air mass through the first few days, but then towards the end, air temperatures start to dip as the high pressure becomes more influential. And notice that there is some cold air over much of Western and Central Europe. So some of that just starting to push into eastern parts of England. What does that mean for 2 metre temperatures, so what we experience down at the ground level? Here are forecast maximums, 15 GMT, Wednesday the 29th. It's a mild picture, 13s and 14s over much of the country. Looking at minimums, 06 GMT, Friday, it's still mild at this point. In fact, double figures over southern parts of England, around the London area, a bit colder as you go northwards. Saturday afternoon, though, at this point, the maximums have taken quite a hit in southern and central regions. If this is right, it's a cold April Fool's Day. Maximums are around 5 or 6 in much of southern and central Britain. Milder as you head northwestwards, double figures there in parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. The reason for the low temperatures being shown in southern and central regions here is that area of low pressure with the northeasterly winds tucking in behind it. So it could well be quite a wet picture at this time, a windy one too, and that somewhat colder air moving in. But I think these maximums in southern and central regions are at the very bottom end of the likely scale. I'll also come back to that just a little bit later. Looking at the forecast minimums for Sunday, probably the lowest values through the first week according to the GFS, although other computer models are showing different ranges through different nights, but I've just brought this one up to highlight the potential extent of a frost risk, because I know it's increasingly important for farmers and growers at this time of year. -1, -2 there being shown in Wales, even in parts of southern England, temperatures dipping a little bit below freezing point. So a widespread frost according to this on Sunday morning. I wouldn't take the details at face value. It really just highlights the possibility of frost becoming widespread on some nights through the second half of the first week. So even in southern Britain, we're not out of the woods yet. Going forwards to Monday afternoon, maximums once more. At this point, they have recovered, double figures again in all areas In fact, the highest values have been shown in northeastern Scotland. Very mild up there, if this is right. So just to clarify the temperature outlook a little bit by using the UK Met Office MOGREPS-G ensemble plot for London. Through the first couple of days, the maximums are increasing, so going up to around 13, 14, 15 Celsius. Then as we go into April, there is a downwards trend, at least something of a downwards trend. It's not very steep. And looking at the 1st of April, the 2nd of April, there's quite a big spread developing there. And really, as I mentioned, that GFS run showing maximums of 5, 6 or 7 Celsius in southern Britain on Saturday was absolutely at the bottom end of the scale. I think it's more likely we'll be seeing 9s, 10s, 11s rather than those lower values. But nonetheless, temperatures dipping a little bit through that period after the mild start. Wind strength, though, could well be the main concern for southern Britain through the first week. This is from the UKV model. It's showing forecast wind gusts at 09 GMT, Friday the 31st, as that area of low pressure tracks eastwards. The strongest winds are in the English Channel, gusts of between 60 and 70 miles an hour. In southern England, 40s are being forecast, according to this run, 40s to 50s. So not terribly concerning, but it all depends on the exact track which that low pressure area takes. Hence, it's worth a look at the ensemble data. So once more, using the Met Office MOGREPS-G data, this is a graph showing forecast wind gusts from all of the runs in the MOGREPS-G ensemble for London, going forward, so from the 28th of March through to the 5th of April. The period in question is here, the 31st of March, and there's a big spread being shown, so different runs are going for different scenarios because small changes to that track of low pressure are what have a big impact on the maximum wind gusts. One of the runs down here is going for maximums of around 15 to 20 miles an hour, but at the top end, 45 to 50. And if we just drop down a little bit further south to Plymouth, some of the gusts here are in excess of 60 miles an hour on a few of the individual ensemble runs. But once more, there is a big spread. It's not a given. It really highlights the uncertainty about that track which the low pressure will be taking. But a good number of the runs are bringing in windy or very windy conditions at this point. Brighton, a similar pattern. Maximums up to or just slightly over 60 miles per hour on the top end there. But most of the runs probably in the 45 to 50, 55 miles an hour range. It is definitely something to keep an eye on though, because as I say, the exact track that low pressure takes won't really be firmed up until shortly before it arrives. Keep an eye on the short range forecasts. Rainfall. The charts here are for days 0 to 5. They show total precipitation in millimetres. The one on the left is generated using data from the ECM model. On the right, it's for GFS. Significant amounts of rain in all parts of the UK, really. The wettest conditions probably in the south and the west. So southern England, seeing 20 to 40 millimetres of rain. Wales also seeing some very significant amounts. Good news for helping to fill up the reservoirs in what is often the driest part of the UK. Going forwards to the 0 to 10 day period, amounts have increased, particularly in the west. The ECM on the left showing totals of over 100 millimetres in parts of northwestern Britain. It's wet there as well in western Wales and southern England. But on the whole, the amounts in central and eastern England haven't increased hugely, and that pattern is probably a little bit clearer on the GFS chart on the right, because that's the model run which starts to have high pressure increasingly dominant towards the end of the first week, and rain on it becomes more and more confined to the northwest of the UK, as I showed on the initial sequence. So taking these four charts together, they suggest the likelihood of significant amounts of rain in all parts of the UK, but In central and eastern England, most of it is likely to fall through the first few days, according to the GFS. ECM perhaps pointing towards the ongoing risk of rain, even in those counties as we head through the 10-day period. So some discrepancies, but the signal is for all areas to see some rain. In fact, the driest conditions may be the eastern part of Scotland, according to both of these charts. But for our differences there, the ECM showing greater amounts of rain in that part of the UK than the GFS. So quite a lot of uncertainty just about how much influence high pressure will be having later on. So looking at the deterministic models together, how do things shape up? Do they help clarify the extent to which high pressure will be influencing things towards the end of week 1? Here is the GFS, which the model sequence was based on, Tuesday, the 4th of April. High pressure here. There's the cold air over Western Europe, and it's just pushing into eastern parts of England. The Canadian model, at the same time, the high pressure here, the wet and windy conditions tending to be in the west and the northwest, with drier periods more likely in central and eastern England. Perhaps, though, not as settled as the GFS is suggesting. Moving forwards to the German icon model, this also has high pressure having some influence, low pressures sitting out to the west of the UK, so broadly quite similar. And going forwards to the ECM, so the European model, the cold air there sitting further east, and a ridge of high pressure at this point over the UK. And there is some very mild or even warm air just pushing up to our west. Finally, the UK Met Office Global, high pressure there, and cold air over central and Western Europe, but not reaching the UK. At this point, it could be quite a changeable pattern still. Risk of rain, according to this, pushing across all regions, perhaps becoming lighter and patchier as it moves into central and southeastern counties, but not really settled if this one is taken at face value, at least at this stage. Looking at them all together, therefore, highlights quite a lot of uncertainty about how much influence high pressure will be having towards the end of the first week. But I think what can probably be said is that after the first few days, which are looking very unsettled, rain, strong winds, the trend is towards things quietening down at least a little bit, particularly in central and eastern England. Also, temperatures probably dipping through the second half of the first week. So how do things look as we go through the second week? As ever, it's all about trends and probabilities at this range, not the details. Using the ensemble data, and I'm going to start with the 16-day GEFS plot for London. Air mass temperatures across the top show quite a big spread. There's some mild runs in there, some significantly colder ones. In actual fact, the thick green line for GFS operational, which the initial sequence was based on, was at the colder end of the ensemble. So when you get this sort of spread, it's really quite difficult to draw too many conclusions. It looks as though a significant number of runs are dipping below the average, early on at least. Then later, the trend is an upwards one. The thick purple line there, the ensemble mean, climbing above the thick black line, the 30-year average, and there are fewer runs remaining below it through the second half of week 2. Taking it all together, it's probably a close to average picture, maybe chilly at the upper air level early on. Rainfall, though, is quite interesting because there are not many spikes along the bottom there. There are a few, and towards the very end, their number starts to increase, but it's looking quite dry if this is right. The 2-metre temperature data table for London, light greens dominant through the first few days, but the amount of them dips. Light greens are forecasting maximums of between 6 and 10 Celsius, so a little bit below the average for this time of year. The amount of yellow, though, starts to grow, as does the orange. Those are the runs going for maximums between 16 and 20 Celsius. Towards the very end, a couple of the runs are climbing above 26 Celsius, 21 Celsius, sorry. So a couple of runs are going very warm towards the end. But the key thing is the signal is for temperatures to be trending upwards after that rather cool start. Up to Manchester, the air temperature profile, very, very similar to the London one. Also, the rainfall amount, not too different either. Not many spikes there through the first few days. It's just towards the end where their number starts to grow. 2 metre temperature data table for Manchester, a very similar pattern to the London one actually. Bits of orange showing up after the first couple of days, and the amount of orange grows there towards the end, so temperatures trending upwards. Up to Glasgow to finish the journey northwestwards. The air temperature profile once again looks quite similar, close to the average. Also, the rainfall profile isn't dissimilar either. Quite unusual for this sort of consistency to be shown across all parts of the UK. There are perhaps more spikes early on, but not a great deal of them, and the general view is for it to be drier than average through the second week. The 2 metre temperature data table for Glasgow. The signal here is probably weaker than on the other two. Light greens do reduce to an extent, and the amount of yellow grows, so it turns somewhat milder or warmer, but it's quite a weak transition through this second week. Just a little bit of orange there showing up later on. But all in all, the signal for temperatures to increase is, or appears to be, more marked in southern Britain than it is in the north. The frost risk, as I sort of hinted at, is increasingly important at this time of year for farmers and growers. Can we expect it to continue through the second week? The answer in a nutshell is yes. The data table here shows forecast minimums for Berkhamsted, so in the home counties. I just wanted to use a location outside of London, away from the heat island which it is. But this illustrates that even in southern Britain, once you get out of big cities, there is still a possibility of frost through week 2. The dark greens, forecast minimums of between 1 Celsius and 5 Celsius, so low enough for ground frost potentially. Also, little bits of blue there showing up at times. Those are runs where the temperature is dipping down to or below freezing point. So even through week 2, there is that chance of frost in southern counties and also therefore in central and northern ones. So something to keep an eye on. The GEFS mean surface level pressure plot for Friday the 7th of April, so generated by averaging out all of the runs in the ensemble, suggests a fairly slack pressure gradient across the UK. It's maybe high pressure having a reasonable amount of influence at this point. But the comparable chart from the European ECM ensemble is a little bit different. Lower pressure close to the United Kingdom, and that suggests a more changeable scenario, a greater risk of rain if it's right. But I think when taken together with the GEFS, the effect is to lower forecast confidence. It could well be the case that the GEFS is overstating the extent of influence of high pressure. Nonetheless, I think it's still worth taking a quick look at the GEFS mean surface level pressure data table for York. This one is going forwards through time, through the second week. The columns are dominated by yellows and oranges, and most of those are runs which are going for above the 30-year norm. There are a few in the yellow category which are dipping a little below it, but the signal is strongly supporting higher than average pressure through the second week. Where will that high pressure area be centred? The chart here is showing the anomaly for days 10 to 15. It's not surface level pressure, but it can be thought of in similar terms. Yellows indicate a positive anomaly, so higher than average pressure. Blues, a negative one. Over the UK, it's positive and it strengthens as you head northwards, but it's worth remembering these are not absolute values, they are anomalies, and generally pressure in the south is higher than it is in the north. So although the anomaly grows as you head northwards, it's not a straightforward picture, not necessarily, but it does point towards the likelihood of high pressure areas playing a significant role through the second week. So to summarise, week 1, it starts unsettled with showers or longer spells of rain in all regions. There is also that possibility of it turning very windy in the south around the 31st. Towards the end of the period though, there is a signal for drier conditions to start to return. And if that happens, the risk of frost will be increasing. But generally, temperatures fluctuate around the average. Week 2, dry periods of forecast, but there is still a risk of rain. There's also a threat of frost, particularly early on. After a chilly start though, temperatures will probably be climbing. So, there we have it. A very mixed bag of weather as we head into April and towards the Easter period. Showers, longer spells of rain, strong winds, and still a risk of frost. Not untypical for the time of the year. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then as ever, please remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons below. Thanks for watching now. Bye.